What do we need to do to allow for change to take place? Developing an understanding of personal, social, and global change may require us to step out of our comfort zones. Is there a possibility that we all may be change makers? With these thoughts, I welcome you to the SOT Infinity session, Be the Change.
I hope you all are doing well. Can I just get a sense of who is here? So maybe raise your hand if you're a teacher. Okay, a lot of teachers. And raise your hand if you're a student. Maybe you can be a teacher and a student at the same time, so that's okay. Okay, cool. And raise your hand if you're still trying to figure out what it is that you are. That would be me. Okay, great. So I wanted to start with a little, it's probably not an activity, but one of those close your eyes kind of things. So everyone close your eyes for probably 10, 15 seconds. And as you're closing your eyes, think about this question: what is it that you most desire in life? Okay, so this is a question that I have been thinking about for a really long time. Initially, I was thinking about it subconsciously, and now I've been thinking about it more consciously. I'm really curious what your answers might be, and this is one of the questions that I want to kind of explore during the next 10 or 15 minutes, my time with you guys. It turns out that this is a question that I sort of stumbled upon some answers to a couple of years ago without really realizing that I was stumbling on answers. I was in a room very different than this one. It was a very small room in upstate New York, and there were about 30 entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs sitting around. And we were asked the same question: what is it that you most desire in your life? And we were asked to close our eyes, and then we went around one by one to share what our answer was. And people were saying things like success, happiness, spiritual enlightenment, security for my family, living my full potential, all of these things. And then after that, the facilitator, who was one of our investors, she had invested sort of in all of these entrepreneurs, she shared a piece with us from someone named Howard Thurman. I wouldn't expect you to know that name. He's an African-American, Black American preacher from the 1900s. He was born actually in 1899, and he passed away about 30 or 40 years ago. And so I just wanted to share with you part of, not the whole thing, but just a part of what that facilitator shared with us, what Howard Thurman wrote, and then talk about it a little bit. So, if you'll forgive me, I'll pull out my note, and I'll read it to you. So this is the words of Howard Thurman. He said, "If I were to ask you, what is the thing that you desire most in life this afternoon, you would say a lot of things off the top of your head, most of which you wouldn't believe. But you would think that you were saying the things that I thought you should say. But I think if you were stripped to whatever there is in you that is literal and irreducible, and you tried to answer that question, the answer might be something like this: I want to feel that I am thoroughly and completely understood, so that now and then I can take my guard down and look around me and not feel that I will be destroyed with my defenses down. I want to feel completely vulnerable, completely naked, completely exposed, and yet absolutely secure. That I can run the risk of radical exposure and know that the eye that beholds my vulnerability will not step on me. This is called the sound of the genuine. The sound of the genuine that's inside of you, the sound of the genuine that no one has." And so, like I said, this sounded really awesome when I read it, but I didn't realize that this might actually resonate with my own life. And it's only now, preparing for this talk, that I look back and realized that this is actually one of the things that I most desired in life. I'll tell you a couple of stories. Some of them are mine, some of them are people that I care deeply about. The first one is when I was a young kid growing up. I'm originally from Northern California. I grew up in a small city outside of Sacramento. And perhaps like many of you, a question that was asked to me all the time was, what do you want to be when you grow up? How many people got asked this question? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? What's your occupation? Right? So in Pakistan, I guess like different communities have different kind of answers to this question. In Pakistan, the answer often should be that you want to be a doctor or an engineer. And in my case, there wasn't really a right answer. The answers could be infinite. And that was really liberating, but it was also terrifying because I had no idea what I wanted to be. My father was a doctor, and he was one of the only Black American doctors that I knew. And so he was kind of weird to me, and I didn't think I wanted to become a doctor. And so I was kind of like moving through life, what are the options? And it turns out that when it came to university, I chose to go study at UC Berkeley because it was the only place that I got accepted into where you didn't have to declare or decide what it was that you wanted to study. You could come in as an undecided major. And so I hadn't made my mind up. I was terrified to decide what it is that I want to be when I grow up. And so I came into that major as undeclared. And I want to share with you guys something really fascinating that happened my first year at UC Berkeley. Basically, I lived in what's called the Black American floor. We called it the Afro floor for short, which essentially meant there were a lot of other people that looked like me for the very first time in my life. Because the city that I grew up in was not very diverse, and I was one of the only people that looked like me and had the same kind of skin color that I did. And so this experience for me was transformative because I had all these doubts, I had all these questions, some of which I shared with you. What do I want to be when I grow up? But also, what's my identity? Who am I? Am I this? Am I that? And I didn't know. And so when I was studying as a freshman in my first year on the Afro floor, I realized that people accepted me for whoever I was. And they were okay with me not being the stereotypical idea of what a Black American was. Previously, I thought a Black American is an athlete or is an artist, or on the other side is someone who's in poverty. These are the stereotypes of Black Americans, especially at the time. And so I wasn't exactly any of that. I was a skateboarder, and I played soccer, and I listened to like alternative, weird kind of music, and I was not sure if that was okay or not. And what I found my first year in university was that that was okay, and that people accepted different varieties of being Black American. And how it relates to today and the conversation and that piece that I shared is what it feels like to be accepted, what it feels like to let your guard down, what it feels like to be the different versions of yourself and to have that be received and be accepted unconditionally. And so I felt really empowered for perhaps one of the first times. And I got involved in the Business Association, and I helped sort of grow that organization as the president. I launched my own enterprise, which was DJing and entertainment events. I got an internship in San Francisco and in New York, and I went to Kenya to do some social work. And eventually I got a job in New York. Thank you. The point is not about the achievements themselves, but what enabled the achievements. That acceptance from the people that were around me. And so this process of becoming who it is that I am, who it is that you are, perhaps, had started when I was at university. And to kind of bring this story to present day, I went to New York for a couple years. I moved to Kenya, I moved to South Africa, and eventually I moved to Pakistan in 2010. I was sent here by an organization called Acumen Fund, and I worked here for a year. And when I worked here, I had a lot of questions about what is Pakistan, what is this place, where's Lahore? I was based there. What are Pakistani people like, and what is it like to live as a black American in Pakistan? I had no idea about these things. And of course, there are stereotypes as well, just like there are stereotypes of being black in America. And the experience that I had was really similar, very different, but also very similar to my experience at UC Berkeley, which was that I was accepted. And I had a lot of support from people that I was working with. And a couple of years later, I had moved back to California. I was working on setting up a social enterprise or an education company, and I was trying to decide what country to base that education company in. And I got some advice from one of my mentors who actually runs Acumen Fund. Her name is Jacqueline Novogratz. And she wrote in an email, I asked her this question: which country should I focus on? And she wrote in an email to choose a country in which you feel most supported, in which you feel that you are most empowered and that you have people that will be there for you, to encourage you when you feel exhausted, to guide you when you're lost, and to help you and accompany you, walk alongside of you in the process. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And the surprising thing was Pakistan was the answer to that question. It was where I felt most supported and where we had the best chance of success. And so what we did was we set up an organization that's called Amal Academy. Amal is an Urdu word, as you guys would hopefully recognize better than I would, which means action, to take action. And the idea behind Amal Academy initially was, can we help people move from education system into meaningful careers and living meaningful lives? And so I'll tell you an example or a story of one of our early students. She's what we call a fellow. We have this 3-month program called the Career Prep Fellowship. And so we had a student called Ikra, and she's from Lahore. She's from Neela Gumbat. I don't know, anybody is from Lahore? Very few people. Anyone has been to Lahore? Okay, good. They say you're not born yet until you visited Lahore, so I'm glad we have some people who are born in the room. So Lahore, Ikra's from Neela Gumbat, which some of you might know is the cycling market. Her father worked there as sort of a repairman, and she was the first student to go to UET, which is one of the engineering colleges in Lahore. And it turns out she was one of few women in her classes, and she was the top performer. She was the topper in most of her classes. And yet, after she graduated, she was looking for about a year for a job, because being sort of in the minority in her classes, she perhaps didn't have the chance to develop that confidence and that exposure and speaking up and communicating her ideas clearly. And so she joined our program around 2014. We were about 1 year old at the time. And she went through our Career Prep Fellowship, which is 3 months. And it's really project-based, and it's sort of experiential learning that you guys are probably doing in your classrooms. For example, we'll have a project where she has to go out into the market with her colleagues and try and raise money for a charity organization. Most of the times, they raise money for ED Foundation. And as you could imagine, this is terrifying, right? You're going to the market, you're going to Hafiz Center, for example, and you're asking vendors, can you give 50 rupees for ED Foundation? And 90 times out of 100, you would expect to get rejected.
And that's part of the process of the project, is learning how to take a risk, take initiative, and get rejected. Another project, they have to try and identify maybe a social problem in society and do something about it. So in Ikra's case, there were some out-of-school kids in an area sort of outside of Lahore and Shadra, and they went to Shadra and they just worked with young kids to try and tutor them or do tuitions and get them back into the school system. They also talked to their parents, and it was a very intimate kind of hands-on experience in which they learned that there are big problems in society, but there are some small answers to those problems, and that you can do something simple and allow it to kind of grow over time and become perhaps something more meaningful. And so through this 3-month program, Ikra developed some confidence, she developed more communication abilities, but really she developed that belief in herself, and eventually she got a job at a company called Fatima Fertilizer, which is a Lahore-based company, and then she worked there for a year, and eventually she got a job at Nestle. That there are some things in life that you could only learn in relationship with someone else. That, for example, if you want to develop patience, or if you want to develop self-confidence, or if you want to develop empathy, these are things that surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, you can't learn as well by yourself, but learn in relationship to someone else. Is that this idea or this process of self-discovery, of becoming who it is that you are, this process or this journey moves most effectively and most efficiently when you're able to provide an environment that's unconditional, where people feel that they are accepted unconditionally. This idea, the technical term is unconditional positive regard. That regardless of what I say, regardless of the hobbies that I might have, or the weaknesses that I might have, or the aspirations that I might have, that we accept each other unconditionally. And so, in conclusion, this brings me back to the room that I told you about in upstate New York, the small room with 20, 30 entrepreneurs sitting around. And it brings us back to the question that I asked you earlier, which is, what is it that you most desire in life? And my hope is that we can think about who it is that we want to become. This question of what is the sound of the genuine that's inside of us. This process of self-discovery and this process of realizing the full potential for ourselves, but also that we could find ways to accept and encourage that amongst our students and amongst our peers. So thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.